Good morning, and this is not a Paxton picture. This is the Nancy Bluebird of Montana show, and we are doing a segment this morning and a few mornings, and today we have a Joseph Metzger, and he'll be speaking shortly, and we just have a lot of things going on this year before the Bicentennial next year. And you'll hear a lot about Paxton. You'll hear a lot about the paintings that are at the courthouse. The museum has two of them here, and we are going to get close views of those pictures that normally a person cannot see because they're so high up in the courthouse. So, all I can say, from a Midwestern person, it's just been so enjoyable to research this, and that I know, I'll be here next for the Bicentennial, and I'm looking forward to just the upcoming things that Missoula has for this. Keep watching the message board, keep reading The Entertainer, and just keep in focus of upcoming events. So we are just going to take it over to Joe. And our guest speaker right now is Joseph Musselin. And Joseph, would you like to come over here and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can go right into what lovely artwork we have here at the Art Museum this evening.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
I forgot.
Right here.
I forgot. It's okay. I'm so used to doing it the other way. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I think rather than talk about me, we should talk about the featured attraction here at the Missoula Art Museum at the present time. Two of the murals that Edgar Paxton painted for the Missoula County Courthouse. Let's talk first about Paxton and the community that he lived in. He moved west from New York in 1877 and lived for a while in Butte and elsewhere, in Deer Lodge, I believe. Then came to Missoula around the turn of the century. He already had a very respectable reputation as a painter of the West. The community that he entered at the turn of the 20th century was led by citizens, I guess I should say, consisted entirely of citizens who were very conscious of history. This was a new place, and their tie, their security blanket was their tie to history. And they were very proud of the fact that they were at the opening of the West. They were part of the opening of the West, and the settlement of it. And well, it's not surprising that one of the first things that the territorial legislature did was to establish the Montana Historical Society. And so Edgar Paxton fit right in. He painted 8 murals for the Missoula County Courthouse. They were finished in 1914. Edgar Paxton painted 8 murals for the Missoula County Commissioners to be mounted in the county courthouse. The commissioners and the Missoulians in general were not satisfied with the wall decorations that had been put up. Edgar Paxton came to Missoula in 1906 and established a studio here. He was doing Western paintings. One of the first paintings of the West that he did was the one that is now in the House of Representatives in Helena. It's a painting of Custer's so-called last stand, the battle at the Little Bighorn. And he was doing illustrations for national magazines and always about the West. The Missoula County Commissioners, with the help of Missoula Women's Club, contracted with Paxson to produce 8 murals for the rotunda of the county courthouse. If you visit the Art Museum in Missoula, you should look at the brochure that has been prepared, which is quite engaging and shows us a picture of Edgar Paxson. Okay. And contains information about each of the 8 paintings. I'll list them very quickly. Panel 1 is the arrival of Father Ravalli at Fort Owen in September of 1845. Panel 2 is the one to my right. Panel 3 is a Montana roundup. Panel 4 is the Flatheads in Buffalo Country. 5, Lewis's party crossing the Clark's Fork River, which we'll get to in just a moment. Panel 6 was the Flatheads leaving the Bitterroot Valley in October of 1892. Panel 7, Governor Stevens's treaty at Council Grove in 1855. And panel 8 is about early transportation. Let's look at this scene now. This is a representation, a dramatization, you might say, of the meeting that occurred on September 10th, 1805. Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery arrived in this vicinity at the mouth of what we call Lolo Creek, or near the mouth of what we call Lolo Creek, on the afternoon of September 9th, 1805. They had come from up the Bitterroot, come up from Idaho, from Lemhi County as we know it now, over Lost Trail Pass. They met the Salish in Ross's, what we call Ross's Hole now, and then walked down with their remuda of some 30, nearly 40 horses that they'd gotten from the Salish and from mainly from the Shoshone. They arrived here with their guide, a Shoshone Indian, whom they knew as Old Toby. Now, he doesn't look particularly old there. It's possible that they called him Old Toby because 2 of his sons came along. So there were 3 Shoshone Indians, and he was the eldest of the 3. The Toby is possibly a contraction of what they understood to be his Indian name. So it was Toby who told them that here is where they had to turn toward the west to get across the Bitterroot Range, to get down to the river where they could navigate down to the Pacific Ocean.
There was also a squaw and a baby.
Yes. Now, we don't use the word squaw anymore.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, Lewis and Clark, Lewis at least, got out of the habit of using the word squaw. She's referring to this young woman here. The word squaw is an Eastern Indian name, Algonquin, New England Indians, roughly. And it actually is a suffix to any number of words having to do with females. It's a suffix, squaw, it was that said woman. And so there was a word ending in squaw for an old woman, and a word ending in squaw for a young woman, a word ending in squaw for a mother, one for a, so on and so forth. So Lewis discovered early on at Fort Mandan, apparently, discovered that the Indians, the Mandan Hidatzes, that they spent the winter of 1804, 1805 among, didn't understand that word. They didn't know what he was talking about. So he began calling her the Indian woman, or Charbonneau's wife. Clark continued using the word squaw. We now consider squaw to be pejorative because of the way it was used during the 19th century by settlers, by trappers, by fur traders, and so on. And so Indian people do not like it, except for the New England Indians who still use it. Now, there's Toby. He is a Shoshone. So is Sacagawea. Now, we debate whether it was pronounced Sacagawea or Sacagawea or Sakakawea. Let me explain that briefly. She was a Shoshone who was captured by the Hidatsa Indians, who now live in North Dakota on the Three Tribes Reservation up downstream from Williston. She was captured around the Three Forks, on the Jefferson River somewhere, several years before the Lewis and Clark expedition came through the Knife River villages. And she was apparently about 12 years old when she was captured. She then went through puberty among the Hidatzes. And it is reasonable to expect, to assume, and the Hidatzes will assure you that this is true, that she was raised according to Hidatsa patterns, Hidatsa life ways. She is along because Lewis and Clark came to realize among the Mandans and Hidatzes that they needed to get to the Shoshone people, to get horses from them to get over the Bitterroot Mountains. And so they hired Charbonneau, Toussaint Charbonneau, as an interpreter. He had two wives. One of them he decided to bring along. He was going to take both of them along on the expedition, but decided to take just Sacagawea. It's a curious choice because on February 11th, 1805, she delivered her first baby, whom they named Jean-Baptiste. He later came to be nicknamed Pomp. Charbonneau is French-Canadian and I believe Shawnee in parentage. Anyway, he's Creole. And Sacagawea, the journalists, incidentally, always spelled it with a G, not with a J. So it's reasonable to assume that they always said the third syllable with a hard G, Sacagawea. Here is old Toby. Now, this man, the central figure in this drama, is literally a central figure. This couldn't have taken place, this meeting, obviously, without George Drouillard. George Drouillard. The journalists, the captains, generally spelled his name phonetically. And phonetically it was Drouillard, or sometimes, as Stephen Ambrose often said, Dreyer. He was an expert in Indian Sign Language, which can be compared to American Sign Language, ASL, but they are not identical. The Indian Sign Language was conventional among all of the Plains Indians, at least, and probably much beyond that. What he is doing here, you see how eloquent his hands are, and Lewis, who's being introduced to these men, he's gesturing too, very eloquently. Drouillard is introducing to Meriwether Lewis 3 Nez Perce Indians that he had met. He was a hunter also, and on the 10th he was out hunting for meat, because that's one reason they stopped at Traveler's Rest. And he encountered these three Indians, three Nez Perce. They were chasing some horse thieves who had stolen 23 of their horses. Druyer is explaining that to Captain Lewis, and here is Captain Clark. I suspect he looks to me as if he's looking at Sacagawea and Charbonneau and asking them if they understand the Nez Perce Indian language. And you can tell by their blank expressions, you see Sacagawea's eyes are sort of looking off to the side as if to say, not me. And so that is, he is the center of this because the communication among these people had to take place through the medium of George Druyer. This is York, Clark's personal servant. He was often called in the journals, but he was a slave. Had been with Clark from a very early age. Over here is another interesting figure, interesting to everybody who reads the story of Lewis and Clark. He was hired at St. Charles, Missouri as a boatman, as a pilot, because he was the most famous river pilot on the Missouri at that time, and most competent. And he proved his worth throughout the expedition. But what we remember about him most is the fact that he had a fiddle along. And certainly the men of the expedition remembered him a long time because he played when he played, they could dance. And this was an important diplomatic instrument in two senses of the word, because the Indians, all Indian tribes, were fascinated by this playing, fascinated by this instrument, and they liked to see the men dance. So he is obviously there because he's sensitive to this. He's part Indian too. I think he's the one who was part French and part Omaha. Druyer is part French and part Shawnee. I think his mother was a Shawnee Indian. The rest of the expedition is in the background. This man here is bringing in a horse that has strayed. That was a nightly adventure for the members of the Corps of Discovery. The horses were prone to wander off. Most of the horses probably were not gelded. These horses were mostly young or worn down because the Shoshone were reluctant to get rid of any of their good horses. This creature right here is obviously Lewis's dog, and any school child knows that Meriwether Lewis had a Newfoundland dog with him, whom he called Seaman. Seaman because the Newfoundland dogs were bred as rescue dogs for sailors, and to help fishermen pull in their nets, their gill nets. Nobody knew that the journals of Lewis's eastern journey down the Ohio River, when he bought the dog, paid half a month's salary for it. $20 was half his month's salary. He only mentions in his early journal that it was of the Newfoundland breed, so elsewhere in the journals, those Ohio journals were not discovered until 1913 and published in 1916. So Paxson had no idea about the dog. But the rest of the journals contain numerous references to Lewis's dog, and there, of course, is the fact that shows up on Clark's maps that there was a stream up our Blackfoot River that was named for Seaman, so he is not, his breed is not mentioned. So Paxson can do no more than take a cue from Lewis's description of Indian dogs, and what he paints here is an Indian dog. One other detail I want to point out is Paxson, I call this a drama at the outset, and that is what it is in several senses. It's a little scene from a drama there, but look at these mountains here. You don't see these right at Traveler's Rest. This was the campsite, now Travelers Rest State Park. Here is Lolo Creek that they called Travelers Rest Creek. But these mountains are what you see just a few miles down the Bitterroot, or I should say up the Bitterroot. These little crags along the tops, along the ridges there. And Paxson does that to dramatize this as the Wild West. It is so truth in advertising is not essential to this. This is a visual play. So the first painting we looked at represents the entrance of Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery into our area, our neighborhood. This one represents the departure of Meriwether Lewis from the Missoula vicinity of Missoula. When they returned from the Pacific Ocean at the end of June 1806, I got to keep my century straight here. Let's back up. When they returned from the Pacific in June of 1806, they camped once more at Travelers Rest, spent 3 nights there. And on the 3rd of July, Lewis and Clark separated. Clark taking a larger contingent, most of the men, back up the Bitterroot and over to Fortunate Camp on the Beaverhead, and then on down to explore the Yellowstone River. And Lewis walks down the Bitterroot River, a little beyond its meeting with the Clark Fork River, and crosses the Clark Fork a couple of miles below that confluence. The river is more than 100 yards wide, 160 yards wide, I believe, at that time, and at the place where they crossed. And it was too deep for the men to swim. The only way they could get across was by building some small, and the journalists say small, rafts. But Paxson has chosen to build, to show some rather substantial rafts. Lewis says in his journal that when they got to this place, which is actually right along the base of Blue Mountain Recreation Area, and a little farther downstream, down the Clark Fork, Lewis complained that there was hardly any wood that was just right for building rafts. They obviously had to scrounge around for some driftwood and make do with what they could find. They built 3 rafts, took them 4 hours, so probably they didn't have time to cut down a lot of trees and peel the bark off and trim the limbs off and then assemble them into rafts. They probably scrambled to get the job done as fast as they could. Anything that would float. If any of you have gone into mountain lakes and found a little raft somebody has put together with which you can get out into the lake to fish, from which you can fish out in the lake, you can imagine what kind of rafts the Corps of Discovery built. So they are standing now on the Blue Mountain side of the Clark Fork. I indicated an error just a moment ago. They're standing on the Blue Mountain side of the Clark Fork, and these men have already started across. Lewis says that the Indians, in a very short while, made little basins of animal skins and put their gear in these little basins, and then swam their horses across, towing these little rafts of theirs. Now, what are these Indians doing here? There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Indians in this picture. Actually, there were 5 Nez Perce guides, 5 Nez Perce men who agreed to serve as guides way over on the Idaho side of the Bitterroot Range. They came along, the 5 of them came along partly because Lewis and Clark had made it clear that Lewis was going to go back to the Great Falls, and that was in enemy territory as far as the Nez Perce were concerned. So the Nez Perce were happy to tag along with these 31 guys with guns and go into the enemy territory. But when they get over to Travelers Rest, they discover that Lewis and Clark are going to separate. They're going to divide this contingent. Lewis takes only 11 men, 11 guns with him, and before they crossed the river, the Indians had already decided that they were going to go back. 11 guns was just not enough for their comfort to go into enemy territory. So Lewis persuades them to at least get us across the river and point us in the right direction. Now, they couldn't say, well, you just go over here until you hit Mullen Road and follow Mullen Road down to Broadway, and then turn and go on Front Street along the Clark Fork and into the Blackfoot, just beyond East Missoula, and then into Hellgate Canyon, and then up the Blackfoot River. That wouldn't work, of course. So the Indians did agree to go just across the river. They got over here, they camped near the mouth of Grant Creek that night, the 3rd of July, and the next morning, after appropriate ceremonies and very cordial best wishes, the Indians took off down the Clark Fork to visit some relatives and friends, and Meriwether Lewis and his Corps of Discovery his contingent went on down or up the Clark Fork. As I say, probably the Indian road that they followed led down Front Street. I mentioned that the essential drama in the picture is this wilderness effect that Paxson creates with these mountains. Look, you don't see these mountains anywhere from the base of Blue Mountain. You see Mount Jumbo, you see Mount Sentinel, you see Grant Creek and the rattlesnakes, but you don't even see the highest peaks in the Rattlesnake from down on the river there. But Paxson has put those in to make you gasp, to make you take a breath when you see it. Wow. This now could be Sergeant Gass. Paxson has him looking over your shoulder, the viewer's shoulder, to sort of draw you in. He's a central figure. Gass was an important member of the Corps of Discovery. He was a carpenter. I suspect he didn't have much to do with putting together these rafts. These pack saddles right here, though, are probably pretty accurate. They made 20 pack saddles when they were down among the Shoshone in Menominee County. And that's probably, the sawbuck saddle is probably exactly what they made.
Now I noticed from the other picture and this picture too that the guy that did the sign language, and also Lewis and Clark, they wore red sash around their waist. Does that have any significance? I mean, could that...
The red sash was appropriate military attire, part of military attire in those days. Sergeants could wear red sashes. Captains certainly did. It doesn't appear that Sergeant, let's see. No, we don't have, we can't be sure of any sergeants here, but Gass is a sergeant. He is not wearing a red sash. He could have been. By the time they had left Fort Mandan in April of 1805, all of their woven clothing, their cloth clothing, had been worn out, except for some of their dress uniforms. They kept those because that was important in their meetings with Indians, that they'd be able to dress up too, as the Indians would do. So Paxson's painting of all these, all members of the Corps in leather clothing is quite appropriate. It is doubtful that they took the time when they made these jackets and pants and leggings, that they took the time to fringe them as we assume frontiersmen,
right.
you know, mountain men did. Perhaps this is Drouillard, George Drouillard, the interpreter now, Drouillard as they called him. And I'm guessing that because, as I said a while ago, he was part French and part Shawnee Indian, and so these decorations on his jacket would seem to be seem to represent Indian style of decoration. This white horse here is an important part of this painting. When Lewis and Clark started back across the Bitterroot Mountains, they had spent a little over a month waiting for the snow to melt in the mountains, the month of May. They camped in the vicinity of Kamei, Idaho, over on the Clearwater River. And then they set out in June, mid-June, to cross the Bitterroots. And before they got very far across, a Nez Perce man caught up with them, bringing a horse for Captain Lewis, a very special horse. We don't know that it was necessarily a white horse, but Paxson dramatizes this element, that element in the story, by making it pied and somewhat like we think an Appaloosa should look.
Right. That's okay. Let's go back and talk about somewhat about Paxson and what he must have did other than just painting in Missoula. I mean, Paxson School is probably named after Paxson,
yes.
You know, and he's probably was well known eventually in the community and everything.
Yeah, I can't say much more about Paxson himself. You can read about him in this very nice brochure.
And that's great. And I understand.
Paxson.
Okay.
Missoulians were very proud of Paxson's presence in their community, in their city, and that pride is reflected historically in the fact that we have a street named for Edgar Paxson, and we have a school named for Edgar Paxson.
And I was just wondering, to get more information, I understand you have a website. Can they get some information through you? And also you have some literature and books out too also.
Well, let's see. All right.
I mean, if that's too personal, that's okay.
Oh, no, I can't. My principal occupation now is as producer of a major website about Lewis and Clark called Discovering Lewis and Clark, which is I'm proud to say, one of the major websites on the World Wide Web now. It consists of well over 1,500 pages at the present time, and it has grown since 1998 by monthly increments. One of the episodes that is in the works now is about Meriwether Lewis's trip from Traveler's Rest through Missoula and on up the Blackfoot over what is historically known as Lewis and Clark Pass, even though Clark didn't go over it. And then Lewis went back to the falls of the Missouri on his way home. That episode for the website Discovering Lewis and Clark is being funded by the Montana Cultural Trust with funding from the coal tax fund.
Now, you mentioned something just a minute ago about the separation. I have heard pros and cons, that when they separated, they didn't agree or they disagreed or whatever. So can you expound on that a little bit?
Yes. Lest I leave you with the impression that Lewis and Clark split from one another at Travelers Rest on July 3rd of 1806. No, they had planned for months to divide the Corps of Discovery into two contingents here at Travelers Rest. Lewis would take a shortcut that Indians had told them about back to the falls of the Missouri, and Clark would go back up the Bitterroot and over into the Beaver Head, down the Beaver Head and Jefferson's River to Three Forks. Part of his group then, led by Sergeant Ordway, would take the 6 dugout canoes back down the river to the Great Falls, where Lewis and his little contingent would meet them. Clark then would go on over through Bozeman and down the Yellowstone. Lewis would go up north into the Marias River Basin, explore the Marias for reasons we don't have time to go into here, but very good reasons, political reasons. Then he would return and join the party going down the Missouri. His contingent and Clark's contingent would unite near the mouth of the Yellowstone. It was one of the most, their parting on the morning of July 3rd at Travelers Rest is one of the most dramatic moments of the whole expedition. Here they were risking everything. See, they numbered only, as I said a while ago, 31 guns, so to speak. There were 33 people, including Sacagawea and the baby. But they not only divided into those two groups, but then Lewis takes 3 men out of his 11 and goes up into Blackfeet territory and explores the upper Marias. Clark then details another one of the sergeants with a couple of men to take their horses back to the Mandan villages, while Clark goes down the Yellowstone River with the rest of the men. So they atomize the expedition. They break it into little groups, the smallest one being just 3 or 4 people, and that's really risky. No, but it was daring. It was not because they were mad at one another.
Well, Joseph, it's been great, and boy, I just love to sit here and listen and listen and listen. You have really opened my eyes, and I think I'm going to go do some more studying too.
Oh, good.
And I'm going to check in on your website.
Wonderful.
And thanks again. Thanks so much for doing this for us.
You're very welcome.
Anything in the future, or anything, you give me a call, okay?
All right.
Okay.
I might add that before you go on, I might insert that the website's URL, the address is 3Ws.lewis-clark.org. Or if you just go to your search engine, Google, and stroke in the 2 names, Lewis, Clark, you'll get a great number of results, and right at the top of the list will be Discovering Lewis and Clark.
Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Okay.